and there's standing water in the vegetable garden.
Ah,
So we're pretty far from seeing flowers bloom. I was down in Portland. I live in central Maine and at a fairly high elevation, so we don't even have daffodils yet. But we were at our son's house in Portland over the weekend, and they had a few spring flowers, so that was encouraging. We call it mud season in Maine. We don't call it spring.
Mud season.
nice.
Well,
Snow is
Portland,
probably melting.
they're right on the coast, so he's got all the lobster fisheries and everything else that he can enjoy. It's terrific.
Indeed. They just moved from Oakland, California to Portland, Maine about a year ago.
Oh.
They're very happy with their move. I thought mud season would finish them off, but they've stuck through it. So
That's interesting. I call it mud season. That's funny. Oh my God. I guess we can get rolling. What do you guys think? It's almost 10 after. I just want to welcome everyone, and I'm glad you could make it. And we didn't set up anything for next month, but it seems like current events are happening so fast around here that I guess you barely have time to keep up. So, but Ron, why don't you introduce our guest? I think unless Laura wants to go over our protocols, but I think everybody's probably knows the drill. I'll leave it up to you.
That's
Laura.
all right. When we start the question and answer, of course, the presentation is first, and then we'll have the question and answer after that, and then we'll mention something about that between the presentation and the Q&A. But we're coming, and we have Lisa Savage tonight. She is active with the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. And that is based in Maine, and so is Lisa. She was just telling us about weather conditions there. Lisa actually, in fact, ran for the Senate in Maine in 2020 in the U.S. Senate against longtime Senator Susan Collins. She actually got 5% of the vote, which is not bad this day and age for an alternative candidate. And Lisa's roots actually are right around here. She grew up in Pacifica and still has some family in San Mateo County. Nowadays, Lisa manages the Global Network's social media accounts, and she does her share of writing, generally speaking. She can be found on Substack at something called Went to the Bridge. In fact, I'll put a link in the chat for that. And, there's a link to subscribing to that. And so if you like what you hear, you can check out her writings. She's also actually been published in Common Dreams and Counterpunch. And when she's not working with Global Network, Lisa also organizes with the Maine Coalition for Palestine, as well as with the statewide anti-war coalition, which holds protests each month. So with as much time as she puts in, we're happy to get some of Lisa's time today, and we welcome Lisa Savage.
thanks, Ron, and thanks everyone for being here. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm the world's oldest social media manager, I believe. I tweet and run the Instagram account for the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. I'd like to go on record as saying I did not name that organization. It is a really important international organization, however, because they have been monitoring the militarization of outer space since the 90s. And it's a very international group. You can check out that website at space4, that's numeral 4peace.org. And they do advocacy work also, but there are people all over the planet paying attention to how outer space is being used. Back when they started, I think people said that was kind of, are you sure that's going to happen? And now, of course, we see with drones, space and satellite linkages are absolutely crucial to the way war is conducted today. And we'll talk a little bit about that as I go along. Okay, I'm going to start trying to share my slides here. So let's see, let me get share screen going. Host disabled participant screen sharing. So you may need to make me a host or enable participants to share their screens.
Can you do that, Lisa, Laura?
I got you. I got it.
All right, it's working, I think. It's working. If you see it, can you see my slide?
Yes, we can. It's beautiful.
Okay, good. So I was asked, Ron conveyed a question from perhaps one of you, a very good question about this beautiful illustration. I am a writer, not an illustrator, but I worked with a professional illustrator named Anthony Freda, who created this vision of image for me to use in the work about connecting militarism and climate harm. And I've put his website address down there at the bottom of the slide, and it's free for anyone to use with attribution. So if you just attribute it to Anthony Freda and maybe, you know,
Yeah, we lost your audio, Lisa.
I think Lisa froze, but let me just wait a second.
Only trouble is when you're frozen, you don't really know it and you keep talking and then
All right.
when you come back on, we've missed something.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like she dropped off to reset.
That happens. Here she comes.
Yeah, yeah.
sorry about that. Don't know why my connection broke, but I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
You left off telling us about to credit him when we went on the website. Is that it?
think she dropped off again.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
She may have to leave her visual off, so at least we can hear her, but maybe I'll mention that to her. But it'd be a shame, but it looks like wait till she gets back.
Maybe she could email the slides to someone and then join by phone.
You run
Yes.
yeah, Lisa, you're
I'm sorry.
you mustn't have too much broadband spectrum there because you're dropping off pretty consistently.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I maybe should go back to my phone. When we were first talking, I was having trouble. I accessed the meeting on my phone, and I think that will be a more robust connection. So maybe I'll just do that. And you might have to show the slides, Ron,
Yeah, I
if
think-
you can.
Yeah, I think Ron's got that covered, I think.
Okay. So
Yeah, look at it, frozen again.
it's coming
Yeah,
up
what
on my
is
phone.
yeah.
That one, I'm gonna get that.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
You're gonna have echoes of yourself there. Be careful.
No, that's not Lisa. That's the little thing that says recording in progress, which is odd because we already knew the recording was in progress.
I
So I
don't
wonder
know.
if Laura knows why that's going on.
I don't know why.
It's because I was on Zoom on two devices right next to each other, so
Ew.
I apologize for all these tech problems. So what I was starting to say is we work with artists quite a lot in the Maine anti-war and climate action. There's a great team called the Artist Rapid Response Team that's part of the Union of Maine Visual Artists that make wonderful banners to order for events and organizations. And I don't know if you can see the art that's on the wall behind me. This is by a Maine artist named Kenny Cole. It is climate and militarism related art. It's called Last Run, and he's got a skier skiing around like a remaining iceberg as a military tank comes around the other side. So I think that art is really useful for communicating and helping people understand difficult ideas, complex ideas, challenging ideas. And so we work with artists every chance we get. And Anthony Freda and Kenny Cole are just two of them. So Ron, when you are able to share the slides, I think we're
I'll
ready.
do that. Okay.
We're ready to go to the second slide now, which is about the Kyoto Protocol.
Okay. Can everybody see? Yes. Okay.
Great.
Oh, okay.
Can
Right.
you advance it one slide? Thank you very much. So in 1997, the information management project about militarism and climate got really going because the US went to Kyoto, Japan, and negotiated very, very vigorously to make sure that military emissions were exempt from being counted in a nation's total. This is basically an information management strategy of the Pentagon's, because they know what a big polluter they are and how much they contribute to greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. But they didn't want other people to be able to quantify that or really analyze it and talk about it other than as a vague concept. One of the ironies of the Kyoto protocols is, after insisting that climate, that emissions from military should not be counted against a nation, as if the Earth's atmosphere was somehow patriotic or nationalistic or believed in Pentagon projects, but not other countries' projects. I mean, it's science. It's not, it's not politics. Then the US, as I'm sure you're all aware, failed to sign the Kyoto protocols. So they kind of kneecapped the agreement and then didn't sign it anyway. One of the phrases that's been floating around the last couple of years from both Russia and China is that they consider that the US is non-agreement capable. That's the translation from the Chinese characters for that. I don't know what it is in Russian. And I think this is a prime example of what they're talking about. The US will engage in negotiations and then fail to fulfill the agreement. Next slide, please. So then we come to the next big climate conference in Paris, the Paris Climate Agreement. And you can see on this map who ratified it and who did not sign, withdrew from it. And oh my goodness, it's the United States again, standing alone with Syria. Not sure what was going on with Syria, but it's part of the United States overall pattern. At Paris, the parties that came together to talk about climate and greenhouse gas emissions said, let's make counting military emissions optional. So a country can include them if they wish, but Syria has since signed. I see George Gonzalez telling us, so thank you for that. Again, it's science. Science doesn't care what flag is on your greenhouse gas emissions. The problem is not one that it can be defined by national borders or politics, but that's where we are. Next slide, please. So there are some good resources out there, and I think that Base Nation by David Vine is one of them. It's not only focused on climate. Obviously, when we're talking about the climate harms of the military, there are lots of other environmental harms that aren't particularly climate related, such as PFAS or other types of pollution of the ground and water tables. So I'm going to focus on climate today, but there's lots more to learn about just the general environmental damage that the military has been allowed to do pretty much unchecked in this country for decades. And I liked David's phrase that the military operates with a kind of cloak of invisibility. Again, information management is key to them being able to do that. One of the things that I think is pretty amazing is that if you Google a general term like military climate, and you could Google it, or you could DuckDuckGo it, or use any other search engine that you prefer, you will get only hits that are about how resilient the Department of Defense is to climate change and all the changes and adaptations that the Pentagon is making to cope with climate change, and how they've gone to more over to green energy so that they can, but really you're going to have to dig very hard to find any information about, yeah, but what is your role in causing climate change? That information is very, very carefully hidden. But luckily we have scholars who are interested in helping us learn more than we know. And I'm going to talk about the work of some of those folks next. If you could give me the next slide, please. I will, before I delve into individual research and reporting on that research, I want to draw your attention to a website that I created, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, where I just started collecting anything I found that I thought was credible and was relevant to not just US military, but any military's effects on climate. So I've been keeping track of those links. And it's on a website, it's a WordPress site called mainnaturalguard.org. And people that are preparing presentations or want to learn more about this might find this helpful. It's in reverse chronological order. So the latest articles that I find are at the top, and it goes on down. We haven't seen Abby Martin's film Earth's Greatest Enemy yet, but that's coming. That will be a really good, I think, documentary approach to describing this problem in a way that ordinary people can learn from and become interested in participating in the solution. The National Priorities Project and Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. have also done some very useful work about crunching the numbers and giving us, again, small bites of information that it can be taken in at once. This one that we're looking at about the B-52 Strato Fortress consuming as much fuel in an hour as an average car driver uses in 7 years, I think is very telling, because obviously in the last couple of years, we've seen lots more military warplanes in use. And even aside from the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate effect of dropping bombs and exploding things and breaking up concrete and so forth, just the jet fuel itself is by far the most polluting of the types of fuels that the Pentagon uses. It's the nature of the way jet fuel is refined and the way that warplanes use fuel, not very efficiently. So I recommend those two sources also, National Priorities and Institute for Policy Studies, if you want some good looking graphics that you can put in a slideshow and talk to people about why going over to electric vehicles or driving our cars less or getting better gas mileage, those are all good things, but they aren't going to solve the problem. This is, the next slide, please, is a graphic that was created by a scholar named Nita Crawford. Dr. Nita Crawford is now at Oxford University in Britain, but she, for many years, worked here in the East Coast, and she taught at UMass when I first met her, but she was part of the Brown University Watson Institute's Costs of War project. Now, the Costs of War project does not only focus on the environmental costs of war. They look at many different angles about what exactly war costs us financially and other parameters. This is some research that Nita Crawford did, working from data that is available from the federal government about fuel purchases. The Department of Defense, I put quote marks around the word defense. The Pentagon is by far the largest consumer of petroleum, of energy of any kind in the federal government. And she worked very hard looking at different departments of the federal government and different kinds of reports, looking for the data that she wanted to find, and was unable to find anything more pertinent than fuel purchased. That is public record. So that is what she worked from. The Cost of War project has particularly focused on US wars since 9/11, so since 2001. And so the data that you see here reflects starting in 2001, and then probably this was published. I'm sorry, I should have included a date on this. I think this chart is about 3 years old at this point. I've had the opportunity to see Nita Crawford present her work. She's very good at explaining what are, fairly complicated things for many of us. And she's written a book. I think it's on my husband's bedside table here, called, if I can just grab it. It's just out of reach. Yeah, so Nita Crawford's most recent book is The Pentagon, Climate Change and War, Charting the Rise and Fall of U.S. Military Emissions. And that's a very recent book. I believe it's copyright 2023. Really worth reading. Lots of good information in there. And if you're interested in her work and you want to move beyond the cost of war project, which is a great website and has a lot on it, I would recommend her book. I have a list of references at the end of this slideshow that will help direct people to the sources for some of this information that we're sharing. Next slide, please. So not surprisingly, the US considers the biggest aspect of climate change is the security threat that it creates, when of course, people fleeing untenable climate, huge storms, flooding, drought and crop failure, when human migration crosses our borders, then suddenly, oh, it's a security threat, and now we're worried about climate. Hurricane Otis drove 250,000 people, so 250,000 people became homeless from one hurricane. As we all know, storms are becoming more frequent and more severe. And the Biden administration's working group on climate change migration is under the National Security Council. It's not under the Department of the Environment or even Health and Human Services. No, it's a security threat. So, that's another aspect of, if you ask, well, what is the Pentagon's role in climate crisis? The Pentagon would give you the answer: securing the borders and making sure that, people aren't entering the US illegally. As we all know, many migrants are also fleeing violent conflicts that the US has contributed to or caused. But in the case of climate, we're all in the same boat here. We're all on the same planet. There is no planet B. And increasingly, people are having to flee their homes because of climate change. Next slide, please. The Pentagon probably should be taking climate change a lot more seriously than it has been, at least its role in causing climate change, because many of their military installations, particularly the Navy, but not limited to the Navy, are right on the coast. And the coastlines are, becoming eroded, and the ocean levels are rising rapidly, dramatically. Here in Maine, here, I believe this picture is Virginia. Was taken in Virginia, Hampton, Virginia. And of course, that's costly. So that makes the Pentagon and Congress and the federal government sit up and pay attention, because it's money they can't spend on other projects. You would think that this would lead them to take a more active role in saying, how are we contributing to climate change so that we don't have to spend as much mitigating the effects of climate change? We'll see if that actually happens. Next slide, please. One of the aspects of climate harm by space programs has not been explored a lot. And the proliferation of launches, mostly of Starlink satellites, which are used not only, but are used a lot for military targeting and military communications, sending drones where you want them to go, and so forth. All those launches are also doing harm to the climate. The ozone layer is eroding again after decades ago, we realized, oh my gosh, things that humans are doing are destroying the ozone layer, and that protects us from solar radiation. Again, that is happening because rocket launches punch holes in the ozone layer. And when a launch fails, which is fairly frequent, space science being a developing field, and they're always pushing the envelope and trying something bigger and newer, it generates massive emissions. There are huge fires, and all kinds of terrible things burn that shouldn't be burning, and putting emissions into the universe. And then one of the unknown damages, or it's a known damage, but no one's really quantified it in a satisfying way yet, is what will be the effect of soot particles in the upper atmosphere, because rocket launches bring that kind of not carbon gas, but the byproduct of burning things is soot. I've seen here in Maine, we have a rocket company that claims, oh, well, their rocket fuel is non-toxic and non-polluting. Well, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I do know a couple of them. Anytime you burn anything, you will be creating emissions and soot, even if your fuel is derived from something organic. And if the CEO of the company can eat it in front of the cameras, or say that they kept lobsters in a tank with it and the lobsters were fine, that's sidestepping the question about, well, how much pollution is that rocket fuel putting into the atmosphere and the upper atmosphere. Scientists are also worried that pollutants will get into layers of the Earth's atmosphere that have not before this been polluted. And one of the most shocking things to know about rocket launches is that there's very little regulation of their environmental impact, of their frequency, of their safety aspects. They just really don't have a lot of regulation. And obviously, a billionaire like Elon Musk has so much influence with the US government now. I'm not holding my breath for them to get more regulation in place. But of course, other polluting industries have been regulated for, in some cases, hundreds of years, because it's a public good to have some entity that keeps track, monitors, and puts some boundaries on that. Not so far in space, but we can only hope. Next slide, please. Obviously, the ongoing wars that the US is supporting and engaging in have a lot of climate impact. We're sort of moving now beyond the war on terror, costs of war research there at Brown. The Nord Stream pipeline released more methane into the atmosphere than any other event since humans have been recording history. And most of us know that methane is an especially harmful greenhouse gas from a climate perspective. This is a picture of the methane bubbling up there in the sea where the pipeline was underneath. So that wasn't an explosion and it wasn't burning anything, but it was quite bad for the climate. And, it may be, certainly since that happened, we've seen even more dramatic weather, big storms, constant storms, and, how much that methane contributed to that, hard to exactly say. Next slide, please. An interesting aspect of the current Israel's war on Gaza is that the Al-Ansara, or the Houthis, have stopped freight going through the Suez Canal if it is not politically aligned with Palestinian liberation. And they have made the decisions about which freight they will allow and won't allow through the narrow passage of the, part of the approach to the Suez Canal that they can control from Yemen. And that we've seen dramatic decreases in the Suez Canal. Probably all of us have seen those maps showing how many ships used to pass and how many are passing now. Well, the ships are still sailing and they're still carrying their freight, but they're going the long way round, going under, South Africa and around the Cape there. And they're emitting far more emissions than they would have had they gone the shorter route. So one outfit in the, I believe, let's see, where were they located? In Europe, I think it was the Netherlands, took time to calculate. They took one cargo ship and found out that it was currently taking this route. And then they did the math and crunched the numbers to find out, okay, exactly how much more CO2
Looks like
phone.
Lisa froze again.
Yeah,
She'll be back. She'll be right back.
Did that.
yeah. It may ask maybe,
There we go. The
yeah,
device
maybe
here moving and
eliminate your video, Lisa, because you're
Can you
froze
hear me?
again.
we can hear you
Yes,
now. Yeah.
but you might
Okay.
be tech. Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
We're going on. Now, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
no, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I just was able to find one example of quantifying one cargo ship of hundreds. And their greenhouse gas emissions went up by 32% because of not being able to take the Suez Canal route. Multiply that by how many cargo ships are out there, and the cargo ships that just sit idling off the Port of Oakland. I've seen them kind of backed up there when I've been in California visiting. That also, if the ports aren't able to handle the volume, or if shipping lanes and shipping transport routes are disrupted, then there's a lot more ships kind of idling or sitting around or waiting to get into port. And that too has its emissions cost. The Gaza war also has, of course, included lots of warplane emissions and emissions from explosions. Another cost of the so-called war on terror that Nita Crawford has paid some good attention to is the greenhouse gas cost of reconstruction. Especially concrete has a pretty high greenhouse gas footprint. And obviously, the photos that we have seen out of the carpet bombing of Gaza, the amount of reconstruction that would be needed to recreate those buildings, hospitals, schools, apartment buildings, would also have a fairly significant cost in terms of greenhouse gas. Next slide, please. So what can we do? Well, we can organize. I was inspired by the orcas that were attacking yachts and disabling them because the yachts had killed a baby orca. So I found this slide at the time. But essentially, I've been working with people here in Maine for a long time about conversion. We have a General Dynamics shipyard here, Bath Iron Works, and all they build is warships. That wasn't always the case. They used to build other things, and they certainly could be converted to building things that would mitigate the effects of climate change rather than contributing to climate change. We're always told that we have military contracting because it's such a great jobs program and people need those jobs. But other research out of UMass Amherst by Robert Pollan and Heidi Peltier, using economic models where they would input $1 billion investment in defense contracting, education, public health, construction for, green, environmentally sound housing or other building components. Any one of those sectors of the environment would generate more jobs than just giving General Dynamics another contract. Defense contracting isn't actually a good job generator, even in terms of jobs, because the jobs tend to be highly specialized, highly paid, and you just don't get as many jobs out of your investment. So pushing for that, I think, is something that we could all be doing. And, aside from the moral argument of why we shouldn't be spending our tax dollars building weapons that harm people, there's a pretty good environmental argument to be made for the same investment could really go a long way towards solving some of our climate problems rather than contributing to them. Could that ever be profitable enough to satisfy the billionaires? Will anything satisfy the billionaires? I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that our government and other governments need to take some pretty strong steps on reining in climate harms quickly and soon, or it may be that we have reached a tipping point where it will be moot and we won't really need to be talking about this anymore. I am an optimist and I never stop trying and I never stop organizing. And I'm sure that those of you on the call today would join me in that sentiment. My last slide, if you go to the last slide, please, are some references. that are relevant to some of the slides that I showed. One of the really good ones that I didn't talk about in much detail, but this is in Great Britain, and they cooperate with Nita Crawford's group in doing research, is the Conflict and Environment Observatory. They have a really good website where they estimate militaries of nations around the globe and what their greenhouse gas emissions are. And Nita Crawford's work has tended to focus on the US. And there are a couple of links here about space and rockets, because I feel like people probably know a little bit less about that. If I were going to recommend just one on this list, the Georgetown Law Review article by Liz Goldstein, Environmental Impacts of the New Space Race, is a very interesting one. And I think that you would find some new information there. Thank you for being here today and caring about our climate, and caring about the fact that our tax dollars just seem to get used for things that we didn't agree to and don't approve of. But, let's work to change that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you
Thank you
certainly
very
got
much.
your program well oiled there. It's well, I shouldn't use that word oil. Non-petroleum lubricant. That's good. Let's see.
I'm wondering, before we go into question and answer, if that's a lot of links on that page, on that last page. I'm wondering how we might be able to snag that and share it, or I suppose I could put every link in the chat at some point while we're sitting here.
Well, if that's a slide,
I copied those, Ron, but
Okay.
I'm not sure how to actually get them into text. I was gonna try.
maybe Lisa could send that one slide as an attachment or a copy and paste
Yep,
into an.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. Just
That'd
the
be-
slide. Mhm.
Thank
Oh,
you.
that'd be great. Thank you, Lisa.
All
You're
right. I mean, there's a cumbersome way to do it. Just kind of click each link.
Yeah, no, if she
And
sends
then
that,
put them on the chat. But again,
she could send that one slide as a copy and paste or something. That would be.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we will move to question and answer, assuming people have questions and answers, and you can do the raised hand thing. There's either something that says reactions on the bottom of your screen, and when you click that, one of them will be a raised hand, and when you click that, your screen will show a raised hand, and will know that you have a question. Or you might see something on the bottom of your screen that says more with 3 dots, and when you click that, you'll see something that says reactions, then click that, then you'll see the raised hand. And apologies if everybody here knows all about that stuff, but you never know. And so we will allow, if you have more than one question, we'll just allow one question or comment at a time, to make sure everybody gets to speak in order. And try to limit, your question or comment to maybe 90 seconds, something like that. And then at some point we'll ask you to to wrap it up or something like that, so that we can get to Lisa's response. And as I say, and you're welcome to put it in the chat, and I haven't checked the chat to see if there's anything there. But does anybody have any questions that they want to ask live?
Seems like as a school teacher, you've done a brilliant job of covering all the bases.
Thank you.
Okay, Analog.
Analog.
Yeah, I just have a very minor question, but I noticed on that map that you showed about the 2015 climate summit that some of the countries ratified and some countries signed. What is the difference between ratifying and signing?
Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is that whoever emissaries you had sent to the Paris Accords could sign for the country, but then depending on what country you're in, maybe Congress has to say, yes, we ratify it. You know, there may be other steps to fully ratifying the country's participation.
So on that map, it looks like a very great percentage of countries finally ratified the whole thing, or do I have it backwards?
Yeah, the dark blue is ratified, and that says 146, and
Okay.
this were 48. You know, sort of like in union negotiations, I think it's similar to that, where you're at the table as the negotiator and you initial the agreement, you sign the agreement, but you still have to go back to your union membership and say, do you vote to accept this contract or not?
Okay, all right, so that's more optimistic, that, in a way, that map. Well, except for us, of course.
Like us.
So George, you seem to have a question.
Well, yes. Thank you for your presentation. I guess
Thank
my comment would be, thank you. My comment would be is that the American so-called national security state, a key aspect of that state is the facilitation of the movement of oil, fossil fuels more broadly. So in other words, what I'm saying is that it's even worse than what you suggest, because much of the American military, the American Navy, the Fifth Fleet, I believe, is centered in the Persian Gulf. So it is about facilitating the movement of oil worldwide, in particular, and its consumption and its burning. And so, what we see is an American world system that is directly politically, economically predicated on fossil fuels. And so the United States uses its control of that transport system, not only to egg on the consumption of fossil fuels, but also as a point of political leverage over other societies. So I think it's even worse than that, because then the points you make are excellent, and they really educated me. What I want to say is that the United States, as a point of fact, is hostile to non-fossil fuel energies. And we see this in terms of its aggressiveness towards China on the question of fossil fuels, because if the world were independent of oil, the United States military in particular would lose the leverage that it gains from the control of the global petroleum fossil fuel system. So I hope I'm making sense here. I hope you understand what I'm saying.
It's a very good point. I agree completely. I think there's a pretty good argument to be made for the fact that both the previous world wars were about access to petroleum. Mosul oil, who was going to control Mosul oil, being a World War I key issue, and cutting Japan off from its access to oil in the Pacific Ocean island, the Pacific Islands, setting off at least that part of World War II. So we're still seeing it. And it's a very good point that the U.S. has used this as sort of a club to keep people in line. Yeah.
Well, let me say this. Let me add this. I put in the chat, I put the title to my book, Energy, the Modern State and the American World System. And there I specifically argue that World War I, well, certainly fossil fuels was a key contributing factor, insofar as that the Germans in the War of 1870 took the Lorraine area from France, and that was the La Seine, the region of France that the Germans took as part of the War of 1870. That was France's prime sole coal producing region. And so that was something that increased tensions between France and Germany, leading to World War I. And yes, I completely agree with you that oil was the cause of World War II. Certainly, you're right. It was clear in the case of Japan, but I argue that it also was the cause of war in the European theater, because, not to get into too much detail on this, but that Germany wanted to replicate the American automobile revolution. So the United States in the 1920s produced something like 80-90% of all automobiles. And Germany needed, in Hitler's mind, to replicate that revolution in order to be competitive with the U.S. And so, my argument in that book is that the real prime cause of World War I in the European theater was Hitler's objective of capturing the Caucasus region, which was the major oil producing region in Europe, again, including everything west of the Ural Mountains, or east of the Ural Mountains.
Lisa, do you have a response?
Well, yeah. But my point is that I look at my book if you could. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thank you,
We
George.
just have somebody else with their raised hand, so we want to make sure we move on.
Thank
So
you.
No, I don't want to cut him off at all. It's just I wanted to find out what the name of his book. I mean, don't be
it's in the
shy,
chat.
George.
No, it's in
Okay,
the chat, Mike.
excellent, excellent. Because yeah, that's a feat of work to put something together like that's obviously very learned. So appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's on Amazon. Just copy and paste that, and it'll come up right in Amazon.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
George.
brother. Thank you.
Okay.
Maybe this would be an appropriate point to show you the cover of Nita Crawford's book too, which
Oh,
I
okay.
can I do this?
Yeah, I can't see it real well.
You're moving it there a little better. The
Pentagon, climate change,
and
and war.
war.
Okay.
And the author is, bring it up a little bit, Nita Crawford.
Let's
Okay,
see if we can write that down while we're
interesting.
listening.
So that looks like that would dovetail with George's work in a way that, well, he started in the 1870s. That's amazing.
He starts way back too. She goes way back.
Okay.
Talks about coal quite a bit and coaling stations as the origin of these 800 some odd military outposts that we now have all over the world. So starting out, those were coaling stations.
Coaling station, yeah, because it took you couldn't go as far on coal. That's what. Looks like we have Michael Kerr.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, although I'm not very ideological, I'm pretty radical in my looking at things, and I feel like the military-industrial complex controls just about everything right now, and that things that happen don't happen by accident. And I don't know if everybody agrees, that I feel like climate change is a catastrophe that we're moving rapidly to, and I don't see the government or people with power really doing anything that's going to really change that. Like solar and all that stuff is being done where corporations make money off of, but there's no crisis being, pushed, like we should be in a crisis like World War II, where everything is the problem. So what I'm saying is we got like over 100 billionaires in the United States, and although it's a lot of money to run for office and stuff, any one of those billionaires could probably spend money to elect in almost every congressional district and Senate candidates that support the concept that we need to do something radical about the climate change. And yet none of them, zero, are doing anything like that. And I'm saying to myself, are these people that have so much money they can do anything they want in the world, why would they want the world to be destroyed that they have full access to? And I'm saying they're not stupid. They have a different plan than doing it politically. And what my feeling is they plan to get rid of billions and billions of people. If you have a lot less people in the world, climate change goes away.
And your response, Lisa?
Well, I think that Michael's not wrong in terms of the evil plans of the billionaires, that they are so crazy. They're building, underground shelters to survive nuclear war. Like that's going to be a great quality of life for your grandchildren. Yeah, let's work on that. Or or Elon Musk wants to nuclear bomb Mars to terraform it, which is some weird word meaning make it more shaped like Earth. The lunatic ravings of people that are wealth hoarders and have completely lost sense of human values cannot guide us to a livable future. I'm kind of radical too, Michael. I think that until the people go on general strike and let the government know, you depend on us, we don't depend on you, none of this will change. Voting isn't going to change it. Working on elections isn't going to change it. It's going to take a general strike, in my opinion.
We haven't heard from Wendy, so let's go to her next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing talk. And I love what you said about organizing and this idea, like all of us together. I guess I'm wondering what would be your vision for a just transition, to make sure that we are bringing along the most marginalized people with us, because that's the only way that we'll have a sustainable future. And I guess I'm somebody who works a lot with mentally ill people. I'm a psychiatrist. So I feel like, what you're saying about greed and that, I mean, we don't consider that a mental illness, but we probably should,
Yeah,
like
like
really, this is an issue. It's really, it's hurting all of us. And
form of schizophrenia.
yeah, it really is. It's a form of complete disregard for these consequences. Okay, so yeah, curious, like what would be your vision, Lisa, for a just transition?
Well, my vision is, that the people must be able to express their will and work together in community to talk and learn and study, to devise solutions that work locally for them, because it's this top down and driven by money decision making that has brought us to this point. We have examples of places like Cuba, where true democracy is practiced and decisions are made for the good of the people. And I think that that's the only way to get a system in place that really serves the needs of the people. This, people in the United States are dying of diseases of despair more than any other cause of death at this point. It's a death cult. Capitalism is a death cult, and climate crisis is just, one manifestation of that.
George, you got something else for us?
Well,
Besides
you
another book?
mentioned Cole. Yeah, no, another book. Yeah, no, I have another book too, the political values of neoliberalism, where I argue, and this is actually drawn. It's interesting. There is talking about mental illness amongst the billionaire class. There was a very fascinating op-ed piece back in 2014 in the New York Times by a gentleman of the name of Sam Polk, and Mr. Polk himself had a past of alcohol and drug addiction, and so he becomes a successful trader on Wall Street. And he came to the conclusion that he himself and all the other senior partners, etc., they were all afflicted by wealth addiction. They were just obsessed with money to a pathological level. And so he himself said, look, I can't go through this again. He had to basically quit Wall Street because, again, he saw himself just so addicted to wealth. And again, this is what he felt that again, his colleagues, including and especially senior partners, were addicted to wealth. Now, just talking about mental illness. Now, what I want to say is, what I wanted to say about real quick, what actually sparked me to raise my hand was the mention of coal, because just again, a little bit more history. The United States, the reason the United States catapulted to the top of the world system in the late 19th, early 20th centuries is because of coal. The United States has the largest coal reserves in the world. It also was the major producer of oil throughout the late 19th, early 20th century. So again, this catapults the United States to the top of the world system. Now, the other dimension here that I want to mention is, what would a more sustainable planet look like? And it begins first and foremost with addressing urban sprawl. Now, urban sprawl is a function of this fossil fuel revolution, because what is produced by large amounts of coal, the large amounts of steel, and then this feeds into the automobile revolution, which is then predicated on large amounts of fossil fuel, of petroleum consumption. So the American, by 1925, just going into a little bit of detail on this, by the 1920s, by 1927, the United States, or 1920s, the United States is 25% of the global GDP is produced by the United States. And not only does the United States have by far the largest economy, but it also has by far the most sophisticated economy. And this relates to the question of automobile production, because the United States is able to mass produce the most sophisticated piece of technology available at the time. And this was, the moving conveyor belt was something that was really quite distinct and unique to the United States in the 1920s and 1930s. And this is why Hitler wanted to replicate the automobile revolution, because he saw the need to expand this kind of very sophisticated production techniques, but that's all predicated on oil and fossil fuels. So the point in the end, the final instance, what I'm going to say is I want to conclude on this point, which is that the American state writ large is a global warming denial state. Now, the Democrats and Republicans are both global warming denial parties. Now, the Democrats will give lip service to global warming, but the reality is they do nothing about it. And even the Inflation Reduction Act, that actually works against global warming solutions because that puts it in the realm of, oh, this is going to be now a nationalist project. We're going to block China and its solar collecting equipment because China has excelled in this realm of the economy. China has excelled in terms of battery technology. So the Inflation Reduction Act actually, in some ways, is an act of war against China to upend and block the solar revolution coming out of China. So again, this Inflation Reduction Act, again, is actually a conspiracy against solar. And it's designed, I submit humbly, to maintain global fossil fuel dependency. And so again, it goes back to the question of wealth addiction and mental illness and insanity. Yeah, that's the quote. We have to really turn to that question. Because why is it that the United States, why is it that the billionaire class is a global warming denial class? And why is it accelerating the global warming catastrophe? Indeed, this year has been a record year in terms of global warming emissions. We do have to start to ask these questions. But again, it begins with the reality that American empire, American success globally is directly unambiguously predicated on fossil fuels. And this is why the United States is incapable of signing, or of course, really unwilling to sign a global warming treaty. Because any real reform of the fossil fuel system is a direct attack on American global empire.
Lisa, any reaction there?
Oh, she's muted.
Can't hear you. Lisa, you're muted.
We're gonna have George to have him come back as a guest speaker. We got so many questions.
I'd be happy to do it, to be honest with you. And again,
What happened to Lisa?
She's
Lisa's
muted.
Unmute yourself, Lisa.
I've had
leave
the
us your
benefit.
email, George. Yeah.
Okay. I've had the benefit and fortune of publishing a number of books on global warming, on also the political values of neoliberalism. So, again, I've been very fortunate to be able to publish a substantial amount. Again, I think that I raised that only because I think you guys would find it interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to send my email to you guys, and I'll be happy to put together a presentation on that.
Excellent. Yeah, Lisa, were you able to hear what George was saying? Because he
I
tied
can
up
hear
an
you.
awful lot of things together there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree about the corporate parties. I completely agree about the Democrats pretending to care about climate. One of the things that I've watched that's been really sad is that environmental organizations focused on climate or more generally on environment get infiltrated by the Democratic Party operatives and just basically eat the guts out of them. So they're still a shell of what they once were. But here in Maine, repeatedly, year after year, we will go to the climate organizations or environmental organizations and ask them, will you work with us on our campaign? And they aren't interested. Well, we have our thing that we're doing and we don't do that. And, if you say, well, but the Pentagon's the biggest polluter, if you're not addressing the role of the wars and military in climate crisis, I don't think you're really addressing climate crisis. But that is by design, of course. And, again, it's going to come down to the people, and the people are either going to have to get back in control of our decision making or not. Somebody was mentioning earlier about wealth, being a sort of a mental illness. We consider hoarding a mental illness. We would treat for hoarding. Isn't hoarding money a form of hoarding? It seems that way to me.
Yep.
And we also know that there's a fair amount of research that shows that the wealthier a person is, the less compassionate they are toward their fellow humans and other life forms on the planet. We don't exactly know what the cause and effect is. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Does it happen to you as you become wealthy, or you grew up in a wealthy family where people just, don't want to see homeless? They don't want to see unhoused people, as an example. Like, they don't care if people are unhoused, they just don't want to see it. So these are thorny problems we're dealing with. As far as U.S. hegemony coming to an end, it clearly is. I mean, they are in their death throes now. There's no way that it was sustainable to have 800 military outposts around the planet. It's unaffordable. We're running on fumes. We're running on debt. But they're never going to admit that they're defeated until they, can no longer draw breath. So we just hope and pray they don't take us all down with them as they struggle to maintain control that is slipping away rapidly in the current day.
Mike?
Yeah, I'll just jump in with kind of seconding that, because the thing called Thucydides' trap, it's like a tongue twister, but it was in ancient Greece, a guy named Thucydides noticed in the Greek states that there was almost a formula that a state would become powerful, and when there's a rival or for whatever reason they start to decline, rather than recognize or accept or rethink or recalibrate their position in the world. And at that time, the world was the Peloponnesian Peninsula, whatever they call it. But the fact remains, it always led to war. It seemed like it was extremely difficult for a hegemon to recede or become one among equals. And it almost always was not easier, but it just seemed like it was just something they could not avoid, was end up going to war and becoming second rate or third or fourth rate by losing in a war. But the fact remains, it seems like humans have a really difficult time moving back from the first seat to the second seat. And it is so evident in what you're seeing with the Ukraine and with our support for Israel and with the baiting and constantly pointing the finger at China. It's just, we cannot get through our heads to the fact remains that, wait, but we were just lucky after World War II as being the only dog left standing, but you can't expect to be the top dog forever. But that's right in our defense data. If you read the defense review, I think it's quadrennial review of where we are defense-wise, they actually have it on paper that we must remain the #1 military force on the world. And somehow why, I don't, but I guess because they feel the world can't do without us. We're so beneficial and law and order for the rest of the world that we have to be #1 in military. And to the point where it turns into what's called the Wolfowitz doctrine, where his actually takes it a step further and says, well, we have to be #1, and if need be, we have to diminish the other people so they cannot get quite to where we are, which leads right to the Thucydides phenomenon. Can't read something 2,000 years old and believe it's true. So I'll leave it at that. Wendy and then George, go right ahead.
Oh, I shared a funny video too. Like this whole conversation is causing me to think of Bill Wirtz. He made a funny comedy music video. It's 20 minutes, but it's like rapid fire world history. And really, I mean, what Lisa, you said about Cuba, I looked up their population is 11 million people. If the US is 300 million, I mean, we are an empire, right? Most empires don't last beyond 200 years, like late stage capitalism. This has an end date. And yet, how do we non-violently dismantle the imperialism of the US? Because right now, I mean, my ancestors are from China. They fled, the Communist Party. They were part of the nationalists, fled to Taiwan, the US. And I don't agree with communism or capitalism when it's imperialist, right? These can only work at small scales. I love the free market. I think it's great, but we don't have a free market. We have a oligarchy, weird system. So if this is really imperialist powers that are fighting on a much higher level than any individual can impact, how do we dismantle these structures from the inside? I guess that's a question, for Lisa and for everybody. That's what I'm wondering.
George might have an answer to that. What do you got, George?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, if I would love to present before this group, the issue of the Enlightenment versus the anti-Enlightenment, because the globalized system creates the very real potential of global government, world government, global justice. And, I'm going to argue that we need to overcome the nation state system. And because we have, first and foremost, we have one bios. This needs to be managed, as one unit, right? This is the only rational way forward. The nation state is simply a system of division and really fundamentally racist, if not racialist thinking. Racialist, if not outright racist thinking. And we need to see each other for the fact that we are one human race, and that we indeed we need to share this planet. We need to manage it carefully. We need to manage our capacity for war making, which is catastrophic, as we could see. Now, on the one hand, what I would say is that there is evidence to say, and lots of very strong evidence, that we are, moving towards a collective understanding and collective solidarity. On the other hand, there are forces that are seeking to maintain division and to sow division and to use warmongering. And so, I mean, I'm going to say that that's at the core of the core of the political dilemma that we face today: the Enlightenment, which is global solidarity, versus the anti-Enlightenment, which is hate mongering, division, war making, etc. And of course, that's the anti-Enlightenment is leading us towards the destruction. So the question that we have is, can we overcome our divisions and live sustainably, etc. and so forth, live in brotherhood and sisterhood? Or will the anti-Enlightenment, the warmongers, will they win out and end up destroying the planet? I mean, one point I want to say on a substantive level, and this, I actually raised my hand for this reason, is that, when you think about the Democrats and how they are global warming deniers, we exceeded last year 1.5 degrees Celsius in terms of global temperature increase. There was a record shattering heat in terms of the oceans. Last year, we emitted record amounts of greenhouse gases. Where's Joe Biden? Where are the press conferences, right? We are in a full-blown emergency. And yet, people talk about conspiracy theories a lot. And I don't even like that phrase, conspiracy theory, because there are conspiracies. Things that Donald Trump spews are fantasies, dark, vile, lying fantasies meant to divide and etc. Spur hate. But this is my point, that the conspiracy is the conspiracy of silence, truthfully, on global warming. It's a conspiracy of the race to the bottom that the world is experiencing. And so the conspiracy is all the pain and suffering being caused by the high expense and the use of housing as commodity, by way of example. And so, that's basically what's going on, right? There are efforts to say, the Russians are dangerous, the Chinese are dangerous, which are really fantasies. The United States is really prodding all of that. And on the other hand, the things that really are important, global warming, global poverty, the risk of nuclear war, let's just conspire to keep silent on that issue. So I know I've said too much. My apologies. Again, I hope to have the chance to present before this group. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Carol.
Well, about quarter after. Oh, okay, we got a few more folks.
Carol's got her hand
up. Back to what George was saying about petroleum kind of being the major factor, and that's what's driven a lot of things. I'd have to disagree with that. I would say it's more what we were talking about a little later, which was the greed factor. Because that's the essence of capitalism, is greed, is striving for more and more profit and, knocking down all the competitors off the top of the hill. And I think it's kind of a question of getting that philosophical point across to a lot of people, which is a very difficult task. But I don't think we should confuse the primary factor of greed with, something like petroleum. And talking about in crises with, schizophrenic people in all levels of society. Yesterday, my son, who recently moved to a nice neighborhood in LA, in the evening when he was coming home with his friends, he ran into cops surrounding his entire building, helicopters flying with no lights on, and a cop pointing a gun at him and telling him to get out of the way because there was an active shooter. And that would probably, if you looked in the news under Marina Del Rey shooter, you would see the event. And it really changes things when you're affected personally. And, a cop could have easily shot at my kid. And that didn't happen. But the guy was shooting from a balcony nearby in the next building over. And it was really a horrendous sound. It wasn't like firecrackers. And I'm thinking, I told him, I said, well, now you know what it's like to live in a war zone. Because that's exactly what it sounded like. But I bring that up just the fact that it showed a video of, or a partial video of the young guy who was the shooter. And he had bleached blonde hair and he just looked like maybe he was high on something. But talking about, people being distraught and confused, they don't understand what's going on. And that's a big part of the problem, I think.
Well, sorry that happened to your son, Cheryl. I'm glad he got to the
Yeah,
other side
glad
of
he's
that.
alive.
You're right,
Yeah.
right. It's I want to turn back to Lisa. We've been kind of skipping around to the people with comments, but maybe you have a comment from what you've been hearing here. If
Well,
not, go ahead.
I feel for you, Carol. My one of my sons lives in Los Angeles too, and has had some encounters that were pretty scary. But I mean, it's the same all over. Here in Maine, we finally had our first mass shooting recently in Lewiston, Maine.
Right.
And it was an Army reservist who had traumatic brain injury from being Army reservist, not from being in combat, but from being in training situations where the constant exposure to explosions gave him a TBI. And then there were some other factors in there, like the heavy gun culture of the part of Maine that he lived in, and the fact that law enforcement let his family say, "Oh, we'll take care. We know he's mentally unstable. We'll get the guns away from him." That's
right.
hidden. And but recently, our congressional we only have 2 representatives here in Maine because we're very low population. Signed on to a bill in the House and to make the Army study and monitor traumatic brain injury from training situations and change the way they're training Army personnel to use firearms so that these TBIs aren't happening as much. And the latest budget that the Biden administration has put forth has more percent spent on violence, purveying violence in the world than any budget since I've been paying attention to this. But yeah, let's put a Band-Aid on traumatic brain injuries caused by being at a firing range for too long. And so we can stand up and say, we care about the people's safety. Another anecdotal, when I was a teacher in a middle school, we were having a special ed meeting and an outside psychological evaluator had worked with a student and was reporting out to us about it was probably a 7th grade. It was a male student. And at one point in giving the report, he said, "Does this student have access to loaded firearms in the home?" And 2 or 3 of us nodded our heads like, yeah. And the psychologist was like, what are you talking about? We're like, dude, where do you think you are? Every house has firearms in it and ammunition. It just does. That's where you are. That's the society that we're living in. I mean, I have my own theories about why the proliferation of guns. People have mental health issues everywhere. They just don't always have access to a gun so that they can kill, 16 people, 30. But my theory about why we have so many guns. I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I just wanted to, interject. There's over 3 guns per person in the United States.
And why is that? I believe it's because our corporate overlords would prefer that we have a civil war rather than the revolution that we need. And the whole Second Amendment thing of, oh, don't you fear the government? Don't you need your guns? Like, the government has drones that are controlled through Starlink. Your little handgun is, beside the point. But they're hoping we kill each other over ridiculous things, and we are.
All right, George, and then I guess maybe we'll call it a night. Or is that the hand still up from before, or do you want to?
No. I mean, I want to say something. I mean, I just wanted to respond to this notion that it's not fossil fuels, it's greed. I mean, look, obviously, greed plays a role without question. I mean, greed is the driver of the capitalist system. But there is a very specific and important political economy surrounding fossil fuels that cannot be underestimated in terms of its key importance, again, to the global world system and, again, American empire. So we see that the United States, for instance, up until about 1970, the United States was actually responsible for about half of total greenhouse gas emissions. Today, it's still on a per capita basis, much higher than China, Russia, all the major countries in the world. And that's because the United States, beginning in the 1920s, but particularly in the 1930s, spurred economic growth through urban sprawl. So sprawl became the prime means of stimulating the economy in response to the Great Depression. So even to this day, urban sprawl is perhaps a prime strategy to stimulate global economic consumption. So American residents with less than 5% of the world's population consume some 20% of total economic output. And so why? Look at all the cars we drive and the size of the cars. The global automobile industry, the United States is indispensable to the global automobile industry. Toyota, Honda, 2/3 of their profits come from American automobile consumption. The SUV, the light trucks, that's the profit makers for the global automotive system. The large abodes that we have, that people buy large amounts of consumer durables to fill these abodes. So urban sprawl, we view it as community, we view it as cultural, but in the very first instance, this is an economic component central to the global world system. And urban sprawl is incredibly energy ineffective. And so massive amounts of energy are consumed by American residents, again, because of urban sprawl. So the federal government is committed not only to fossil fuels as a tool of imperial influence, imperial control, but it's also committed to massive amounts of energy consumption in the United States, again, as the main prop for the world capitalist system. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we'll tie it up with that. That's it's a great philosophical tendrils going in every different direction for sure. But I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. And George, make sure you get that. I think you got the email to us. So yeah, I'd love to chat with you some more.
Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. Thank you.
So with that, hopefully everybody monitors our email blasts that we send out. We're maybe once a week. We're not trying to fill everybody's inbox too much, but we do we've replaced our newsletter. We used to send out a paper newsletter where you realize, this is 2024, and so we're going to reserve our communications with emails, and want to thank everyone for coming.
Before we go, I want to put our email address in the chat so that people can send us an email and ask to be on the listserv if they aren't already there. Maybe everybody here already is there, but in case that is not the case,
You never know.
There it is.
Okay.
And I want to thank Lisa, as was mentioned by Cheryl, and the rest of us. I think we all feel the same way. We are very grateful, Lisa, to your presentation, and we look forward to getting all those links and stuff.
Thank you, Ron. I did email you the slide with the references on it.
All right.
And I want to welcome Wendy as my latest Substack subscriber.
Wendy, oh, how nice.
It's free to subscribe to my Substack. I am on it. My writing. That is one of the nastiest words of late stage capitalism, monetize. People are always like, why don't you monetize? Because I don't want
You don't want to monetize.
We're all monetized.
But thank you for a great conversation. It was really nice meeting you all.
Oh, you were a pleasure.
So
really
much,
a pleasure
Lisa.
to have you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
We have your mailing address as well, do we not?
You do.
You gave it to Ron? Okay, great.
Not
all right,
positive,
with that,
but I'll get it from you.
Yes, I want to thank everyone. And I hope we didn't keep Lisa up too late. I know it's 3 hours later than it is here. But everyone, enjoy your evening, and thank you so much for attending. Really enjoyed it.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Lisa. Thank you, girl.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Hey,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
See you soon.
Thank you, Wendy.
Mhm.